Great. Another wretched day on this godforsaken moon. I've been here for... I don't even know how long now. But I'm sure I'll find a way out of here eventually. One day. Right, Dumpling? Right? Oh, come on, don't look at me like that. I'll find us a way off of this stupid moon, if it's the last thing I ever do. It's no use even thinking about it. I'm doomed to spend the rest of my life here, talking to a literal fuel tank. Hello? Is anybody there? Oh, come on, I know it wasn't you, Dumpling.
Hello, Sugar.
What the? Who are you? Why are you so... corrupted? Am I hallucinating?
Sugar, please. It is I, Bob Kerman. I have come to assist you in your plight.
Bob? That one nerd Jeb would always lock in the science lab? Yeah, right. I've gotta be hallucinating this, right, Dumpling?
Would a hallucination be able to do this?
Fair enough. But why have you come here?
Listen, I need you to make your way back to Kerbin for me.
I don't understand. You want me to get back to Kerbin? I mean, I'd give anything to. I've been trying to, but...
Not a problem. Can you do it if I give you this?
What the... How did you...
I manifested it from the air molecules. It's all yours. And please, refer to me as Your Excellence.
Yes, Your Excellence. It's perfect. I shall be on my way shortly.
Good, good. Once you get the bloop here into orbit, head to the small moon of Enos. It is here that I shall grant you my next trial.
Yeah, that's right. Hello everybody, and welcome to a bit of a different video. It seems that despite my clear intention not to rescue her, Sugar Kerman has begun making her journey off of Ethel with a little help from a certain divine being known as Bob Kerman. Considering her history with the KSP, this doesn't exactly bode well for us. But given that Kerbin is completely oblivious and has long since forgotten all about Sugar's existence, there's not really anything we can do about it anyways. So I suppose we'll just sort of observe as Sugar now ascends into low Ethel orbit on board the wonderfully named Bloop SSTO, named that because of how its mildly obese fuselage reminded me of that one cryptid sea monster of the same name. After it had successfully reached orbit, the craft inside was released from the belly of the beast. The BGS-1, good, Bob-generated Spacecraft 1, which, as you can see here, is pretty minimalist in its design, apparently because Bob could only be bothered to spare so many air molecules for its manifestation. Despite this, it was more than capable of bringing Sugar home, complete with a separate lander, a rover, a rotor assembly for later, and 4 extra fuel tanks for repeated use of the lander. And speaking of the lander, After Sugar had performed a few extremely exciting periapsis kicks using the agonizingly slow ion engines, which she could, at least for now, only burn like 50 meters per second of delta V at a time due to electrical constraints, and then performed some reassembly of the spacecraft since she didn't need the rover, she then set off on the tiny skeletal lander, known as the Stick Bug, towards Aneta's innermost moon, a tiny asteroid moon called Enos, which, at least at first, proved to be a bit of a challenge due to the moon's high inclination relative to Ethel, but after some fiddling around with maneuver nodes, Sugar Kerman was able to make her way to it without too much difficulty. Except for the part that the only means she has of controlling the stick bug is through the gimbal on the 6 Spider engines, since reaction wheels would be far too costly for Bob. In order to maximize her Delta V potential, she also used the tried and true witchcraft technique of holding out her EVA jetpack to make it massless. As she made her way in towards Enos, she was then treated to perhaps the best views of the entire Calbello system had to offer, rivaling those of Calbello's accretion disk itself. But she was already more than familiar with that by this point. This, by comparison, felt highly tame and serene, even despite the fact that she was sitting right in the middle of Aneta's radiation belt. However, irradiated or not, Sugar then entered orbit around the tiny moon, and proceeded to land near its north pole, as the terrain at other latitudes looked, let's just say, less than favorable. Well, Bob? Sorry, Your Excellence. I made it! I even brought that little flag praising you that you wanted.
Excellent work. Bob is pleased today. Now, for your next trial to prove you are indeed worthy, once you have rested, go and land on Elad. You shall then climb a nearby peak in your rover.
Dale? Elad? You mean the moon that's basically Timu Tylo? In this thing?
Yes? Is there a problem?
No, not at all, Your Excellence.
That's what I like to hear.
And so it was. After spending a few hours contemplating her life choices on Enos, Sugar then lifted back off to begin her journey to Elad. However, before she could proceed, she first had to return to Ethel to meet back up with the Good, which, luckily enough, Bob had actually been kind enough to outfit with a probe core, meaning that once she returned to a high Ethel orbit on fumes, she could remotely guide the Good to her position using a game controller Bob had graciously allowed her to bring from Ethel. But not Dumpling. Not Dumpling. Sugar would never forget Dumpling. Wilson! Actually getting the Good back to Sugar's position was a bit of a challenge. As mentioned previously, it currently can't maneuver very much due to electricity constraints. Nevertheless, after a couple passes to set up the encounter, and a lengthy burn at under half throttle that left Sugar Kerman on the edge of her external command seat, the Good and Stickbug were successfully reunited. Elated, Sugar then docked the two crafts back together, and after receiving a blessing from Bob granting her unmatched engineering prowess, curious, how did that happen? She performed some reassembly that allowed her to get rid of the first fuel tank, seeing as the lander now had used up its reserves. Following this, Sugar Kerman then headed to Dale, Elad, as Bob had requested. but not without performing a gravity assist after setting up a resonant orbit with Ethel first. And also, waiting. A lot of waiting. But that was something Sugar was well and truly used to at this point, now wasn't it? Until, finally, a while later, the grayish-brown moon of Elad loomed before her, which, as previously mentioned, is pretty much just a knockoff version of Tylo. As she then attempted to enter orbit around this off-brand moon, however, she noticed something unusual. The surface seems a lot darker than usual. This could only mean one thing and one thing only. Elad was eclipsed. With the ion engines rapidly running out of electricity due to the absence of solar power, Sugar had to frantically come up with a solution. To briefly fire the lander's engines after turning the craft around to finish the insertion burn.
That was close.
After that crisis had been averted, Sugar then proceeded to perform even more exciting circularization burns, until, at last, it was time to land and fulfill Bob's request. In order to do this, the stickbug had been outfitted with an upper descent stage, graciously allowing for a safe descent to the surface. It may have also been a tiny bit over-engineered, as it had been tested by somebody on Tylo, but it get the job done. After landing successfully on Dale, Sugar then broke her neck on the surface and deployed the rover, which she then called the Roly-Poly on account of its unfolding nature. However, shortly after this, she then realized something. She only had that one flag to plant for Bob and no others. That is, until Bob summoned a mysterious craft to allow her to plant more flags. Curious. Sugar then planted this flag in honor of Bob, establishing the town of Sugardale, and then set off on her rover expedition to a mountain peak to her east, as Bob had commanded. To put it bluntly, however, this rover had some issues. Namely, that the docking port at the end would just instantly explode, annihilating the entire thing once it exceeded about 10 meters per second. In order to remedy this, Sugar then attempted to reassemble the entire rover, which proved to be nigh impossible due to the wheel's tendency to just roll away like they just escaped from Shawshank. And also, there was the fact that the docking port was actually the root part of the rover, meaning that it couldn't have been moved anyways. It was only after Bob granted this docking port indestructibility that the journey could truly begin, which quickly turned into a true snooze fest due to this rover's low speed and the overall bland nature of Elad's surface. In fact, before she could even reach the peak she'd set her sights on, Bob had Sugar stop at a smaller, nearby hill because he himself had gotten bored. Eagerly obliging, Sugar then stopped, planting another flag which she marked Mount Sucrotia. "I've done what you requested. I planted another flag in your honor." "Bob? Bob?"
Sorry, this place is boring. Excellent work. For your next trial, I'll cut you a bit of a break. Go and land on Yulb, the mysterious blue moon in the sky. You know, even I'm still not quite sure what's going on with the coloration of that place.
After accepting Bob's next trial, she then made her way back to the stickbug. In order to reattach the rover, she then used the patented somersault method, and after climbing back into her seat, began the treacherous ascent. An ascent which may or may not have had to be repeated a couple of times due to action groups not actioning, as well as the stickbug's extremely low thrust-to-weight ratio, but other than that, went just fine. Especially with this extremely scuffed setup of just decouple the descent stage like a launch escape system last second. Once the treacherous ascent had been completed, Sugar then rendezvoused back with the good, and, as per usual, made a bunch of periapsis kicks before continuing on to the bluest of moons. Yolb, or however you're supposed to pronounce that.
Why are you blue?
What is wrong with you? Why are you blue? Which, although it would seem to be the most forgettable of Anetta's main 3 moons, actually turned out to be quite a bit more interesting than Elad on the surface. Despite outwardly looking similar to the moon, except for, blue, it's actually got considerably more gravity, being almost identical to Val in terms of radius and gravity. But as Sugar can attest, this moon was in fact not made of ice at all, as the surface during the day was scorchingly hot, especially in the dark mar that Sugar had touched down in. Things didn't exactly get much cooler temperature-wise as Sugar then continued off to a nearby crater rim, but they did get a lot cooler in terms of the terrain that became visible. What was not cool, however, was the next trial that Bob gave to Sugar in order to return to Kerbin.
In order for me to grant you passage back to Kerbin, you must now travel to the Sunorc system.
Sunorc? You mean like another star? But you do remember how insane I went during the first interstellar transfer, right?
Relax. It shouldn't take you nearly as long. Once you arrive there, reach the icy moon of Noric, located in the Symmetra system.
If I must, but how long will something like that even take?
Oh, only on the order of 50 years or so. Should go by in the blink of an eye. I'm capable of time travel, after all.
Very funny, Bob. Very, very funny. With the knowledge of the new, monumental trial that she now faced in the back of her mind, Sugar then reluctantly made her way back to the lander, and after once again performing the somersault maneuver, made her way back into orbit, being treated to quite the sight to behold as she did so. Owing to the Good's pitiful thrust-to-weight ratio, Sugar knew that there was absolutely no way she was going to be able to perform a freaking interstellar transfer burn around Yolb alone, and as such, once she had reunited with it, she placed the Good into a parking orbit around Anetta between Yolb and Elad, where she waited, and waited, and waited some more, seeing as luck would have it, Sunorc and Errolke had just closed their last transfer window, meaning that Sugar was going to have to spend multiple decades whirling around the ringed gas giant. Until, at long last, several decades later, may I add, Sugar commenced her escape burn, which took quite a while, seeing as she could only throttle about halfway through for most of it. Taking her not only out of the Aneta system, but out of the Eroc system as a whole. Casting her into the dark void between the stars that orbited mighty Calbello. It was also at this point that the Good actually got its official name, seeing as crossing interstellar space very much reminded me of that one video with Voyager 1, playing Johnny Be Good from its golden record. As she drifted off into deep space, Sugar filled with fear as she gradually returned to the state she'd spent over a millennium in, drifting alone, silently in the dark, frigid space between stars. Except this time, she didn't even have a capsule to reside in. There was truly nothing sitting between her and the endless, empty expanse. But, deep down, she knew she had to endure it if she wanted any chance of making it home. To right the wrongs that the KSB had put her through, to tear down the institution that had brought her and so many others so much suffering, to take her revenge, to bring them to justice. These thoughts filled her head as she drifted off into sleep, entering a state known by Kerbals as astrostasis, since, as is well established, Kerbals don't actually need food or water to survive, but what they do need is energy. Their green skin normally achieves this through photosynthesis pretty well, but, no sun, no energy. The only option now is to enter a state of deep stasis, in which Kerbals can survive for hundreds of years given the right circumstances. Until, after what felt like an eternity, because it kinda was, Sugar was then awoken by the maneuver alarm clock. She looked around with glee, expecting to be greeted by Sunorc's warm, orange rays, but alas, this was not yet to be, as she'd only just reached her mid-course correction burn. Darkness still remained all around her as she started up the Good's twin ion engines for the first time in several years. Engines which, believe it or not, could still actually be used, as even out here, Eroc A still provided the Good solar panels with a feeble charge, allowing the burn to be completed, even if it took almost a month. However, it had done what needed to be done, placed Sugar on a trajectory to capture into the Sunorc system via a Symmetra gravity assist in over a decade's time. Sugar then returned to astrostasis, and after that decade came and went, she found herself awakening once more on the outskirts of the Sunorc system. Delighted at the fact that she could once again actually see anything, she remained quite giddy as she made her first approach to the Symmetra system. Except, as you'll soon see, this approach went south pretty quickly, thanks to the general weirdness of spheres of influence when it comes to binary systems. So yeah, Sugar got to experience a live Frank Symmetra concert. One reload later, Sugar then set her periapsis a little higher to avoid this fate, and after then spending a few more years in this highly eccentric orbit she'd been put in, encountered the binary ice giants once more, flying in between them in order to get a capture into the system for free. Heck, Bob didn't even order this. I guess she just felt like being a daredevil. After this death-defying maneuver,
What the hell is even that?
Sugar then raised her orbit and then set off for the icy moon of Noric, as Bob had ordered her to do. Of all the moons she'd thus far visited, Sugar definitely took a liking to Noric the most, as it vaguely reminded her of Elu, a place that she'd previously said she'd rather be stranded on than stuck all the way out here. Another thing to like about Noric is the fact that it actually has a thin atmosphere, meaning that Sugar was able to aerobrake safely to a low orbit with the Good. Shortly thereafter, she then detached the stick bug and prepared for landing. Which took a couple of attempts due to her overestimating the effectiveness of Noric's paper-thin atmosphere at slowing her down, or due to her landing on the side of a cliff, but regardless, she did eventually make it, and after another deployment of the rover, she began making her way north towards a deep crack she'd spotted on the surface during the descent. Reaching this canyon, however, proved to be a chore, thanks to the plethora of jagged mountains in the way, as well as the rover's generally poor performance due to the lack of sunlight. However, even despite these challenging conditions, Sugar managed to get the rover all the way to the canyon without any mishaps, maintaining her perfect record thus far. That's not to say there weren't any close calls, however. Despite these close calls, Sugar still made it to the canyon in one piece, and proceeded to take in the mesmerizing views of the valley that lay far, far below. In order to please Bob further, she also proceeded to name the canyon in his honor, because clearly his ego wasn't big enough already, being a literal god and all. After then recharging the batteries, Sugar then made her way back to the stick bug once more, this time taking a faster, less hilly route that was sure to be much safer, and she flipped the rover. Way to go, Sugar. Despite this setback, after a quick reload, Sugar managed to make her way back to the stick bug safely, after passing through a few grand valleys and taking in the gorgeous views of the system. Once she had safely reached the lander, she proceeded to jump back into her seat, and sadly, due to the Delta V constraints, decided to leave the rover behind on the surface. Even so, despite these weight savings, the ascent back into orbit would still prove to be somewhat narrow in terms of Delta V margins, with Sugar only just making it back on a sliver of fuel. It was here, back in low Noric orbit, that Sugar received her next trial from Bob. Land on and return from the cloud-shrouded, toxic moon of Norreg. Needless to say, she wasn't exactly thrilled by this news, but given that she'd been through literally everything at this point, her reaction was one of mild annoyance, if anything. At least getting there would be easy, seeing as the Good had now become significantly lighter without that heavy rover to lug around. After only a couple of acceleration burns, Sugar then found herself making her way out to the dreaded green moon. Which very much reminds me of Tecto from OPM. That being said though, it's a good deal larger, and has a much thicker atmosphere to boot, meaning that Sugar here was in for quite a challenge. In testing, a Norreg ascent placed this lander near the limits of its capability, thanks in no small part to it having the aerodynamic qualities of a Jeep Wrangler, which didn't exactly leave Sugar in the most comfortable of moods as she finished her aerobraking down into low orbit. And to make matters worse, upon inspection of the rotor assembly, Sugar was bewildered to find that it had somehow deformed. In fact, the deformation occurred to such an extent that the assembly would be downright unusable in this state. Psst, Bob, help, it got messed up.
What is it that you concern me with?
Yeah, let's just take a look at the rotor, will ya?
How in the name of Kalbilla? What did you do to it?
I didn't do anything. It must be the Kraken fighting us from beyond the grave or something.
That pesky Kraken. Never could fully vanquish its influence, even after I did put it to rest on Bob all of those years ago. Just, give me a second. I'll fix it. And voila. Good as new.
Thank you dearly, Your Excellence. And with that miraculous blessing from Bob himself, and totally not the cheat menu because genuinely, what was I supposed to do about that?
What?
Sugar could then proceed with her mission once more. Yeah, about that rotor assembly. Since it's only got one rotor in order to save weight, there isn't actually any counter-rotation going on here. Meaning that landing was a little difficult, seeing as I could only hover at such a blade angle that would also cause the stick bug to spin rapidly. Despite this, Sugar managed to land successfully, and proceeded to step out onto the hostile, corrosive surface of Norreg, where, after taking in the views of the toxic skies, she then realized she'd run out of flags once again. Not to worry though, as Bob will spawn another craft. Wait, what the actual hell is going on here? Why has everything been censored? Bob, what is the meaning of this? Or is the Kraken coming back from revenge? I don't know. What Sugar did know, however, is that after whatever that was had happened, all of the stickbug's rotor blades had mysteriously just vanished. What is wrong with this game, bro? Going back to a point in time before any of that had occurred, Sugar then decided it would be best if she just took off again as soon as possible. And as such, she began her grueling ascent back into the atmosphere, which, despite how unstable it looks, was actually quite easy. And a few minutes later, after some last-minute fiddling with action groups at about 25 kilometers altitude, Sugar let the rotor assemblies loose and fired up the stickbug's 6 spider engines, beginning her slow ascent back into orbit. I say slow because it had to be. If Sugar had throttled the engines too much during the earlier stages, the craft's brick-like aerodynamic profile would have ensured an unsuccessful attempt, dooming Sugar to become imprisoned on yet another world, this one far more hostile and unforgiving than the one she had already spent all of those years on. Needless to say, these thoughts didn't exactly help to ease Sugar's mind as she made her ascent back into orbit. Thankfully, though, these fears proved to be unfounded, as Sugar made orbit with a safe 400 meter per second margin remaining. And with that, Bob could proceed in giving his next and final trial, landing on Sarah's distant moon of Dipuk, after which Sugar would be granted passage back to the Kerbal system. Eager to accept this final challenge, Sugar then proceeded to prepare herself for her next interplanetary transfer, using a series of Norreg gravity assists to place herself into an eccentric orbit around Simet Symmetra, before waiting patiently for the right moment to depart, which came nearly a year later. Sugar Kerman then graciously performed her ejection burn after circling around Simet Symmetra for the final time, and soon after, she watched intently as the pair of ice giants revolved around one another, growing smaller and smaller with each passing minute. And, before too long, Sugar once again found herself in interplanetary space. Following another correction burn due to the inclination being off by a whole 5 degrees, she then made her approach to the ringed, Duna-like world of Sarah. Though nowhere near as impressive as Anetta's, Sarah's ring still put on quite a display as Sugar proceeded to perform her capture burn around the planet. After that had been completed, Sugar then finished her journey to Dipuk, Sarah's only natural satellite. Lucky for her though, Bob's last challenge would prove to be by far the easiest, seeing as Dipuk is fairly similar to the moon in most respects, albeit slightly smaller and with a bit less gravity, and oh yeah, it's covered in active volcanoes. Even despite this activity though, Dipuk would prove to be quite a pleasant destination, serving as a bit of a reward for Sugar following all of the trials and tribulations she'd been through. Bob even acknowledged this as he gave Sugar one last mystery craft with which to plant her final flag. What's going on here? Bob, is that you? Oh, please don't tell me that volcano over there is about to blow. Bob, you're actually here?
Sugar, I am deeply proud of you. You have obediently and diligently done all that I have asked of you. You have well and truly proven yourself worthy of your return.
Anything for you, and anything to get me home and put an end to the KSP's foul ways once and for all.
There is something I must tell you, however.
And, what may that be?
The KSP, well, you see, no longer exists. And neither do most nations on Kerbin that existed at the time that you left. Kerbin's become a vastly different place over the past, let's say, millennium and a half?
Well, I mean I'd expect it, given how much time has passed, but how different is it?
It's probably best I didn't go into too much detail, for I may fill you with existential dread, but alas, this future I describe is irrelevant.
I guess I understand, but how so?
For you see, in order to enlist your help, I traveled forwards in time many hundreds of years, through one of these things called wormholes, which can link together distant points in space-time. It is through one of these that I shall grant you your return. In an orbit around Sarah, not too much more distant than Dipuk itself, I have created such a wormhole. Pass through it, and it shall send you to a distant orbit around Kerbal, from which you can easily make it back to Kerbin. Do be advised though, the system looks quite a bit different. I did some remodeling after my ascension, let's say. Aim for the 4th moon of Jewel, and when you get there, well, let's just say there's a group there that'd be pretty stoked to meet you. A group who shares your disdain for all the reprehensible things that the KSP has done.
I understand, Your Excellence. I thank you for all that you have granted me. And now I shall proceed back to Kerbin to enact my retribution